Hello again, I'm Lucky and I'm pursuing my integrated MBA in data science and artificial intelligence from IIT Mandi, and I'm recording these videos just for the sake of improving my communication skills, have consistency and gain knowledge. So yesterday I covered 9 suggestions on how to get most out of the book How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And today I'll be starting with part 1, that is fundamental techniques in handling people. And in the part 1 I'll be starting with unit 1, that is, if you want to gather honey, don't kick over the beehive. So it goes like, on 7th May 1931, the most sensational manhunt New York City had ever known to come to its climax. After weeks of search, two-gun Crowley, the killer, the gunman, who didn't smoke or drink, was at bay, trapped in his sweetheart's apartment on West End Avenue. 150 policemen and detectives laid siege on his top floor hideaway. They chopped holes in the roof. They tried to smoke out Crowley, the cop killer, with tear gas. Then they mounted their machine guns on surrounding buildings, and for more than an hour, one of New York's fine residential area reverberated with the crack of pistol fire and the rat-tat-tat of machine guns. Crowley, crouching behind an overstuffed chair, fired incessantly at the police. 10,000 excited people watched the battle. Nothing like it has ever been seen on sidewalks of New York. When Crowley was captured, Police Commissioner E.P. Morolini declared that two-gun Desperado was one of the most dangerous criminal ever encountered in a history of New York. He will kill, said the commissioner, at the drop of a feather. But how did two-gun Crowley regard himself? We know, because while the police were getting fired into his apartment, he wrote a letter addressed to whom it may concern, and as he wrote, the blood flowing from his wounds left a crimson trail on the paper. In this letter, Crowley said, "Under my coat is a weary hurt, but a kind one that would do nobody any harm." A short time before this, Crowley had been having a necking party with his girlfriend on a country road out on Long Island. Suddenly, a policeman walked up to his car and said, "Let me see your license." Without saying a word, Crowley drew his gun and cut the policeman down with a shower of lead. As the dying officer told, Crowley leaped over the car, grabbed the officer's revolver, and fired another bullet into the prostrate body. And that was the killer who said, "Under my coat is a weary hurt but a kind one that would do nobody any harm." Crowley was sentenced to an electric chair when he arrived at the death house in Sing Sing. Did he say, "This is what I get for killing people"? No. He said, "This is what I get for defending myself." The point of the story is, Two-Gun Crowley didn't blame himself for anything. Is that an unusual attitude amongst criminals? If you think so, listen to this. "I have spent the best years of my life giving people the lighter pleasures, helping them having a good time, and all I get is abuse. The existence of a haunted man. The existence of a hunted man." That's AI Capcom speaking. Yes, America's most notorious public enemy, the most sinister gang leader who ever shot up Chicago. Capone didn't condemn himself. He actually regarded himself as a public benefactor, an unappreciated and misunderstood public benefactor. And so did Dutch Schultz before he crumpled up under gangster bullets in Newark. Dutch Schultz, one of New York's most notorious rats, said in a newspaper interview that he was a public benefactor, and he believed it. I have some interesting correspondence with Lewis Laws, who was warden of New York's infamous Sing Sing prison for many years, on this subject, and he declared that few of the criminals in Sing Sing regard themselves as bad men. They are just as human as you and I. So they rationalize, they explain. They can tell you why they had to crack a safe or be quick on the trigger finger. Most of them attempt by a form of reasoning, fallacious or logical, to justify their antisocial acts even to themselves, consequently, stoutly maintaining that they should never have been imprisoned at all. If AI kept Kontugan, Crowley, Dutch Schultz, and the desperate men and women behind prison walls don't blame themselves for anything, what about the people with whom you and I come in contact? John Wanamaker, founder of the stores that bear his name, once confessed, I learned 30 years ago that it is foolish to scold. I have enough trouble overcoming my own limitations without fretting over the fact that God has not seen fit to distribute evenly the gift of intelligence. Wanamaker learned this lesson early, but I personally had to blunder through this old world for a third of a century before it even began to draw upon me that 99 out of 100 times people don't criticize themselves for anything, no matter how wrong it may be. Criticism is futile because it puts a person on defensive and usually makes him strive to justify himself. Criticism is dangerous because it wounds a person's prestigious or precious pride, hurts in the sense of importance, and arouses resentment. B.F. Skinner, the world famous psychologist, proved through his experiments that an animal rewarded for good behavior will learn much more rapidly and retain what it learns far more effectively than an animal punished for bad behavior. Later studies have shown that the same applies to humans. By criticizing, we don't make lasting changes and often incur resentments. Hans Selye, another great psychologist, said, as much as we Hans Selye, another great psychologist, said, as much as we thirst for approval, we dread condemnation. The resentment that criticism engenders can demoralize employees, family members, and friends are still not correct the situation that has been condemned. George B. Johnson of Enid, Oklahoma, is the safety coordinator for an engineering company. One of his responsibilities is to see that employees wear their hard hats whenever they are on job in the field. He reported that whenever he came across workers who were not wearing hard hats, he would tell them with a lot of authority of the regulation and that they must comply. As a result, he would get sullen acceptance, and often after he left, the workers would remove the hat. He decided to try a different approach. The next time he found some of the workers not wearing their hard hat, he asked it if the hats were uncomfortable or did not fit properly. Then he reminds the men in a pleasant tone of voice that the hat was designed to protect them from injury and suggested that it is always to be worn on the job. The result was increased compliance with the regulation with no resentment or emotional upset. You will find examples of futility of criticism bristling on 1,000 pages of history. Take, for example, the famous quarrel between Theodore Roosevelt and President Taft. A quarrel that splits the Republican Party, put Woodrow Wilson in the White House, and wrote bold, luminous lines across the First World War and altered the flow of history. Let's review the facts quickly. When Theodore Roosevelt stepped out of White House in 1908, he supposed Taft, who was elected president. Then Theodore Roosevelt went off to Africa, to shoot lions. When he returned, he exploded. He denounced Taft for his conservatism, tried to secure the nomination for a third time himself, formed the Bull Moose Party, and all but demolished the GOP in the election that followed. William Howard Taft and the Republican Party carried only two states, Vermont and Utah, the most disastrous defeat of the party had ever known. Theodore Roosevelt blamed Taft, but did President Taft blame himself? Of course not. With tears in his eyes, Taft said, I don't see how I could have done any differently from what I have. Who was to blame? Roosevelt of Taft. Frankly, I don't know and I don't care. The point I'm trying to make is that all of Theodore Roosevelt's criticism didn't persuade Taft that he was wrong. It merely made Taft strive to justify himself and to reiterate with tears in his eyes, I don't see how I could have done any differently from what I have. Or take the teapot dome oil scandal. It kept the newspaper ringing with indignation, and in the early 1920s, it rocked the nation. Within the memory of living men, nothing like it happened ever before in the America public life. Here are the bare facts of scandal. Albert B. Fall, Secretary of the Interior Harding Cabinet, was entrusted with at leasing of government oil reserves at Elkskill and Teapot Dome, oil reserves that had been set aside for the future use of the Navy. Did Secretary Fall permit competitive bidding? No, sir. He handled the fat, juicy contract outright to the friend Elward D. Donny. And what did Donny do? He gave Secretary Fall what he pleased to call a loan of $1 lakh. Then, in a high-handed manner, Secretary Fall ordered U.S. Marines into the district to drive competitors who adjacent wells were swapping out of Elk Hills Reserve. These competitors, driven off their ground at the end of guns and bayonets, rushed into courts and blew the lid off the Teapot's Dome scandal. A stench nose arose so wild that it ruined the Harding administration. News it an entire nation threatened to wreck on a Republican Party and put Albert B. Fall behind prison bars. Fall was condemned viciously, condemned as few men in public life have ever been. Did he repent? Never. Years later, Herbert Hoover intimated in a public speak that President Harding's death has been due to his mental anxiety and worry because, as a friend had betrayed him, when Mrs. Fall heard that, she sprang from her chair, she wept, she shook her fists at fate and screamed, What? Harding betrayed by Fall? No, my husband never betrayed anyone. This whole house full of gold would not tempt my husband to do wrong. He is the one who had been betrayed and led to the slaughter and crucified. There you are, human nature in action, wrongdoers blaming everybody but themselves. We are all like that. So, when you and I are tempted to criticize someone tomorrow, let's remember AI Capcom, Gun Crowley, and Albert Fall. Let's realize that criticism are like homing pigeons. They always return home. Let's realize that the person we are going to correct and condemn will probably justify himself or herself and condemn us in return. Or, like the gentle Taft, will say, I don't see how I could have done any differently from what I have. On the morning of 15th April 1865, Abraham Lincoln lay dying in a hall bedroom of a cheap lodging house directly across the street from Ford's Theatre, where John Wilkes Booth had shot him. Lincoln's body lay stretched diagonally across a sagging bed that was too short for him. A cheap reproduction of Rosa Bonheur's famous painting, The Horse Fair, hung above the bed, and a dismal gas jet flickered yellow light. As Lincoln lay dying, Secretary of War Stanton said, There lies the most perfect ruler of men that the world has ever seen. What was the secret of Lincoln's success in dealing with people? I studied the life of Abraham Lincoln for 10 years and devoted all the 3 years to writing and rewriting the book entitled Lincoln the Unknown. I believe I have made as detailed and exhaustive study of Lincoln's personality and home life as it was possible for being to made. I made a special study of Lincoln's method of dealing with people. Did he indulge in criticism? Oh yes, as a young man in Pigeon Creek Valley of Indiana, He not only criticized but also wrote letters and poems ridiculing people and dropping these letters on country's road where they were sure to be found. One of these letters aroused resentment that burned for a lifetime. Even after Lincoln had become a practicing lawyer in Springfield, Illinois, he attacked his opponents openly in letters published in the newspapers. But he did this just once too often. In the autumn of 1842, he ridiculed a vain, pugnacious politician by name of James Shield. Lincoln lampooned him through any anonymous letter published in Springfield General. The town roared with laughter. Shields, sensitive and proud, boiled with indignation. He found out who wrote the letter, leaped on his horse, started after Lincoln, and challenged him to fight a duel. Lincoln didn't want to fight. He was opposed to dueling, but he couldn't get out of it and save his honor. He was given the choice of weapons. Since he had very long arms, he chose cavalry broadsword and took lessons in sword fighting from a West Point graduate. And on the appointed day, he and Shields met on sandbar in Mississippi River, prepared to fight to death. But at the last minute, their seconds interrupted and stopped the duel. That was the most lurid personal incident in Lincoln's life. It taught him an invaluable lesson in the art of dealing with people. Never again did he write an insulting letter. Never again he ridiculed everyone. And from that time on, he almost never criticized anybody for anything. Time after time during the Civil War, Lincoln put a new general at head of army at Potomac, and each one in turn, McClellan, Burnside, Hooker, Meade, blundered tragically and drove Lincoln to pacing the floor in despair. Half of the nation savagely condemned these incompetent generals, but Lincoln, with malice towards none, with charity for all, held his peace. One of his favorite quotations was, "Judge not, that ye be not judged." And when Mrs. Lincoln and others spoke harshly to the Southern people, Lincoln replied, "Don't criticize them. They are just what we would be under similar circumstances." This is the quote that I found most useful from today's reading. That is, don't criticize them. They are just what we would be under similar circumstances. So that was all for today's reading, and I found it a little boring in start, but let's see how it goes until the end. Okay, good night, Jai Hind.